I want to talk a little bit about Rhino. So I'll introduce it. Nadia gave a brief introduction about it. So why do we use Rhino versus other 3D modeling tools? Well, it's powerful, it's pretty popular. You can also do parametric design in it with a plugin tool called Grasshopper, which means you can automate a lot of your designs. And then another reason is just like the visual aesthetics of Rhino, and that's powered by math. There's something called NURBS. And what that allows for is like sleek curves. So if you've ever used SketchUp and you're trying to do like a circle, your circle is actually a bunch of little lines that are small enough to look like a circle, but in Rhino, it actually uses calculations to figure out the true shape of those circles. So that's why we would use like Rhino over a 3D modeling tool like SketchUp. Here I'm showing you some of the work that I've done with Rhino. This was for a grading assignment I did for Sean's class, just to show the landform that our proposed grading structure would create. And as you can see, you can render your tools in Rhino with different surfaces or materials. And those materials can look like real world objects, including things like clay or plaster. And you guys will all know Gustafsson. She likes to work in clay before she goes into design her memorials or landscapes. As you can see here, this is like the Princess Diana Memorial once it's been built, but this was her kind of concept for it in clay. This image up here is the tutorial I'll go through with you today to show you how to make a whole series of really simple basic forms. I'm not going to get into like to Grasshopper, which I believe Nadia used to create that waffly effect with the curves. But I do encourage you guys to look into that on your own. There's tons of YouTube videos about it, and it's actually something I'm trying to teach myself right now. So I encourage all of you to try learning Grasshopper. It's actually not as difficult as it sounds, as I've learned from my initial few tutorials. But today we'll focus on some of these more simple forms like what you see here. Here's just another example of something I've created. And then this is for a part concept we did in one of Nadia's classes. We used Rhino again to form some of the just like do some of the massing and structures and forms. And then we then applied different shapes and textures on it with Photoshop and Illustrator. But why I like to show this slide is because, as you're doing your design work, like Nadia definitely encourages this, start with pen and paper, think about what you want to build and sketch it out, and then bring it into your 3D modeling software. So as we do this form assignment, think about that. Sketch out what you want to start building. Okay, now let's start getting into the Rhino interface. Let me open up Rhino. And while I do that, does anybody have any questions or concerns about anything so far? Okay, all right. I'll take silence as a no. I'm going to open up a new model. By the way, you guys can all get Rhino for free as a trial. But if you like using this tool, I definitely recommend buying it. You guys are in fourth year, so you qualify for educational pricing, which is about $200. And unlike Adobe or other software, this is like a one-time fee of $200, and you have Rhino for life. So it's pretty good, and it gives you updates, but the software doesn't change drastically that much. At least it hasn't so far. So definitely advise you getting it as a student versus trying to pay for it as a professional later on, especially if you're self-employed like I am. Okay, so now we're in Rhino. The first thing we should talk about here is what you might not normally see in other modeling software, which is that there's 4 windows. So as you can see, there's the top view, a perspective view, a right view, and a front view. And as you start drawing in Rhino, you can look at your model in all these different angles. While it might seem confusing at first, as you start manipulating your model, you'll see that actually these 4 views come in handy. And I like to actually change the sizes of these as I'm working. As I find as I start to trace out what my concept in top view, I focus a lot on top view. And then when I take it to 3D, I'll then open it up in perspective and focus more on the perspective view. So I like to kind of work like this. Another thing we should talk about here is Rhino has these grids in your modeling space, and these grids are customizable. Right now I have them set at minor grids every 1 centimeter and major grids, these darker lines, every 10 centimeters. So I can work easily in metric, and then I also understand generally how to work in this space. If we go into File and Settings, this is where we are actually able to change our grid. So right now I have 200 total grids on my screen. I have a major grid line every, oh look, it's 1 meters. Great, I want to change it to centimeters. So if I want to change that, I go into units and I change my model units to centimeters. This is important for your assignment because you're working you're trying to create an object that's 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. So why not just work in centimeters? So let's scale our model. There's nothing here, so it's not that important. So now if I go back to the grid, it should say, okay, great. Every major grid line is 1 centimeter. Every minor grid line is 1 centimeter. Every major grid line is 10 centimeters. Great. So now we know we're working in the right units and at the right scale. Okay, so let's just go ahead and draw a box in this top view. I just want to have an object in here. I'm going to use grid snap because I want my box to be drawn at exactly 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters using this 10 centimeter grid I have as a background. So as you can see, I click box in the left-hand toolbar, and then the command line has shifted after my first click. So my next click is going to be the other corner of the box. So I'm going to click here in this second corner, and then my third click is going to be the height of the box. So if I go back to perspective, I can change the height. And for this one, I'm actually just going to type in 10. Okay, great. So now I have a box. And if you're wondering why this box is kind of just like a wireframe or an outline, that's because your different viewports in Rhino have different viewing options. So if we right click the title of the viewport, which is perspective, we can actually change it. I like to work, especially with simpler models, I like to work directly in rendered so that you can see how your objects are forming as you create them. But that takes up a lot of computer power. You can always just use things like shaded for more simple objects. But for now, let's stick with rendered. And then what I'm also going to do is, because I like working in this white kind of clay-like texture, but it's hard to see against the background, I'm going to go ahead and change the background. So I go to File, Settings. Okay, you all recognize this. Under Render, I just add a gradient on the background. And honestly, I think that's enough. So you can start to see the shapes you're manipulating in here. Okay, great. So there's that. We've talked about the viewports. Now you guys are in 4th year, so I know you've used AutoCAD, and just like AutoCAD, Rhino has a command line. So we talked about it just a little bit, but let's talk about it some more. You can type in really whatever command you want, and Rhino will perform that action. And like AutoCAD, a lot of the commands are the same, which is great. But some of the more important ones I'll get into if we look back on my Rhino Rhino Miro board here. I'm going to be following this form-making tutorial, and I've highlighted all the commands I'm going to be showing you in yellow. So we can actually share this Miro board with you, and you have a list of all the different commands I'm going to use in this tutorial. Okay, now let's just go back and make sure we talk about everything in the interface. Okay, great. There's a few things here I'd like to talk to you about in Rhino. So we've already drawn a box, but the way Rhino works is there's different categories of objects that the software uses to model. One of them are points. So if I, just click on points here in the toolbar, I can put a point in. One of them are lines and curves. So Rhino kind of treats lines and curves as the same thing. The difference is curves, you kind of draw as like a, I'm going to turn grid snap off for a sec. Curves you draw directly as curves. Polyline are just like straight lines that are multiple line segments. And then surfaces you can draw using, these 3D shapes, just like how we built the box here. So these are 6 different surfaces applied to this box, right, to create this rectangle Euler cube. Okay, so that's that. Let's delete everything. Actually, let's add the box back because this is important to show you this. Colorful little object here is called the Gumball. And Gumball is perhaps the most useful tool in Rhino. You can toggle it on and off if you have a Mac at the top here by clicking Gumball. If you have a PC, it's probably on the bottom, somewhere here in the bottom left-hand corner. And what Gumball does is it lets you manipulate this object in a whole series of ways. As you can see, there's different colored axes in your Rhino model. Green meaning like X or Y axes, red X or Y axes, and blue is the Z axis direction. So if you use your Gumball tool, you can actually drag and drop this object along the Z axis by clicking and dragging on the blue arrow. You can click and drag on the green arrow and move things only along the Y axis, which is great because it doesn't move out around the object like kind of infinitely in space. It moves it solely on one axis. And then you can move around your object along the X axis with the red arrow. So that's pretty cool. And then as you can see, there's this little grid here in your top, front, and right views. And using that grid, you can click on it and drag in multiple directions, up or down or side to side. So that's pretty cool. Another thing you can do is you can actually rotate objects with this Gumball. If you see these curved lines here, you have green curve, blue curve, and a red curve. Depending on the curve you select, you can actually rotate the object. And because it's a square, and because I have Ortho on, which is another tool available from this top bar on a Mac, if you turn Ortho on like it is now, I'm fixed to 90-degree angle intervals. So I'm flipping the square by 90 degrees. But if I turn Ortho off, I can actually flip the square or the cube freely now. And if I use the blue axis, I can rotate things kind of freely that way too. So these, as you can see, this Gumball tool is like infinitely useful to manipulate your objects, but also control their exact location. It allows for a lot of precision. I always kind of have Gumball on while I'm working in Rhino in 3D. Last thing you can do with the Gumball is you can start to change the size of the object. And how I did that is on the opposite end of the arrows, there are these colored squares. And if you just like click on that colored square and drag it, you pull it in and out, you can kind of manipulate the object along that dimension. So now suddenly we have this like rhombus, 3D rhombus thing. Anyway, that's the Gumball. So we've talked about Gumball. We've talked about the only other ones that I'd say you should use on a regular basis, or I use on a regular basis, are Grid Snap and Ortho. And we talked about those two, right? Like Grid Snap, if I turn Grid Snap on and I draw an object, I snap exactly to the grids that are on the screen, and then ortho, I can only draw lines along, 90 degree, 100 degree, 270 degree, right angles basically. Okay, great. So let's delete all that. We've pretty much talked about everything in the Rhino interface that makes it unique as a program. There are other things that we can talk about that put it in line with other programs like AutoCAD and etc. It does have this concept of layers. I do like to use layers for my models just to keep my model very clean. You can also apply surfaces or materials to different layers, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later. So let's just start going ahead and drawing. And I'm hoping to make this like a little bit interactive. And it's worked really well in the past because what I've done in the past was I've shown this, and I've asked the students to choose one that particularly calls to them. And we can make it together. So I'm hoping one of you will choose one of these little vignettes here, and I can start building it and showing you how it's done. Does anybody want to choose one?
If I could choose one.
Yes.
It's the one between the trees and not the one at the bottom, right?
This one?
The middle one, yes.
Okay, cool. That's a fun one. It's some of my favorite tools to use in Rhino. It's kind of similar in the same way to build this one here as it was to build this one, which Nadia showed in her slides before this. So I'll show you how to make one versus the other. So let's go back into Rhino, and let's actually start again with a cube. So let's type in box, and then I'm gonna now specify one corner of the box. Again, I'm following in command line exactly what it wants me to do. So specify first corner of box, second corner of box, or the length, and then height. Let's actually just start with a height of 1 centimeter for now. Right, so that I've created my pad that I'm going to use to model my surface on. Okay, now this is super easy after this. You're going to be like surprised at how easy it is. You just have to know what the commands are to do it. First thing we want to do is we want to separate out the top surface from the rest of it. So to do that, we use the command explode. So as you can see, explode has turned my box into multiple surfaces that I can take apart. But I don't necessarily want to take it apart. I just want to isolate the top. And then now with this, I'm going to type in rebuild. And with rebuild, that lets me on a flat surface draw a grid of however many columns and rows I want on that grid. And then I can then manipulate the points using that grid. So at every intersection you see on this grid, I can manipulate the points. Okay, let's start with something really simple. Let's start with something that's like 5 by 5 for the grid, and then hit rebuild. As you can see, it kind of looks like nothing happened, but let's type in points on. And that's my grid. So if I take a point and I lift it up using the blue, blue arrow, suddenly I've created like a mound on my platform. So you can already see how like you can use this rebuild mesh and point manipulation to start, creating your objects and your forms in 3D. Okay. And then now if we took another one and we bring that up, look at that. Okay, let's go back. Let's rebuild this with even more points so then we can start to create more refined shapes. So I'm going to show you these points are on unless you turn them off. So you can type in points off. And then that turns the points off, right? Okay, so now let's rebuild. And let's just create like a ton. Let's create something that's like 25 by 25. Okay, so as you can see, the grid's changed, and then let's type in points on. So now we have like a grid of 25 points by 25 points, basically, that we can manipulate. And let's just start to pull these up. It's pretty darn easy, right? There's like, it's not that hard. But you're gonna do it in a way that you wanna make it look like aesthetically pleasing, right? Like one of the reasons that this is so appealing is because it kind of looks like water is vibrating, because you know the waves that you're creating look like they're flowing along a specific surface or in a direction. And you can start to do all that. Like this thing I'm showing you here doesn't look like that much right now, right? So try and find like a visual cadence in what you do. I think one of the ways that that was achieved, the last image I showed you, again, let me pull that up. Yeah, one of the ways this was achieved was not by creating a square grid with rebuild, but by creating rectangular grids. And I'll just show you what I mean by that. Let's type in rebuild now. Let's make it 25 by, let's make it 10. Actually, let's make it 30 by 10. Rebuild. Okay, so now I have these like rectangular grids. They're no longer square grids. And I'm gonna type in points on. So I get my points. So Rhino, because there's so many objects and they're all layered on top of each other, when you click an object and it thinks you might be, you know, wanting to select one of many things that you could have possibly clicked on, you get this like choose objects window, and you just have to like choose the one you actually want. It highlights it in pink which one you're highlighting within the window. So I want actually this one, and I want to lift this up, and I want to do the same thing here. I want to lift that up. I want to do the same thing here. I want to lift that up a little bit. And then I'm just going to choose a few just based on that texture that we looked at. Whoops, I accidentally clicked off, so I have to turn points back on. Points on, right? And I'm just going to start lifting these up. So we're kind of getting at a similar effect to what that model Nadia showed created, right?
And Matt, can you actually show, I think it's if you hit control, you could, and you could select multiple points and lift all at once.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Control. It's actually shift.
Sorry,
yeah,
shift. Yeah, shift.
Yeah, you can lift multiple points at once like that. Right? And then what else you can do, so let me hit shift again and select even more. What you can also do is you can just click on the arrow you want to move in the direction of, and actually just type in the direction, the number of units you want to move it up by. So I'm going to change this one by 1.5 centimeters. And as you can see, all those points came up by 1.5 centimeters, right? So we're getting close now. Let's type in points off. And then look at that. Like that's pretty nice. And I'm sure if you spend even more time on it, it'll look even nicer. But as you can see, like it's not that difficult to start forming these forms. It's that initial learning curve of Rhino that turns a lot of people off. But once you get over it, like it's so easy. Okay, now while we're here, let's do something else. Let's play with the materials a little bit, just because that form Nadia showed had a different material on it. So let's actually do that by moving this into a different layer. Let's move this into layer 2 and call layer 2 surface. And then layer 1, let's just call that rename it to base. I'm just double clicking to rename base. Yeah, we can actually change the materials for that layer. Yeah, use layer material. So as you can see, I clicked on this little white box next to the surface layer, and it brought up this little window, and I can actually change now. Let's change it to, let's change it to paint just for now so you can see the different things. And I get to change the color to whatever I want. So you can start manipulating textures and materials that way. I tend to like to keep things really, really simple. So if you're gonna start to change the materials and textures, just try and stick with like one or two materials. And often I find sometimes it gets quite distracting even to have any bit of texture and color beyond the forms. So I always kind of advise against it unless you think it adds something to your form. If it's additive, then that's good. But but just be cognizant about, using colors and textures on surfaces that become distracting. Okay, so I think we've covered enough for this little vignette here, right? We even got like a bonus form that's a little bit more like this one. Does anyone else want to choose a different little?
Well, Matt, just one last thing. Now,
Yeah.
you have to regroup it to make it a solid again, or?
I guess.
I think it might have to be regrouped to make it solid.
Okay, yeah, to be able to print it.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you can do that. You can do that different ways.
Yeah.
You can just type in group, right? Or you can type in Boolean union. Boolean union. Whoops. And then now it's all together.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And maybe when the next one, it doesn't have to be for this one. If you lift the edges and then there becomes like an opening or a gap, how to seal that gap.
Okay, yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the way I've been doing it. There's lots of ways to do it. This is just the way that's simplest. So, okay, let's just delete this box. And then let's do points on. Oops, not pints. It's not 5 o'clock yet. Points on. Okay, now let's start lifting the corners. This is just for like just to give you an idea. Let's lift those corners a little bit. So if I had the box underneath, this would be an open shape, but what I can, uh-oh. Where did Rhino go? Uh-oh. Pretend that didn't happen. Let's reopen Rhino. So this is what happens as your model starts getting more complex. Then I actually advise, maybe you don't need to work in rendered. Maybe you should just work in shaded for now until you're ready to then export your model. Because what's happening is Rhino's trying to do all the calculations in the background behind all these curves and behind the light. And it's just a lot. So as your model gets more complicated, like this one is because of all the curves, it's fine to have in shaded. Okay, so let's type in explode. Let's go back to where we were. Explode. So now these are all separate shapes. Let's type in points on. Let's multi-select our points that we want to bring up. So it's like now we have these like open surfaces. Let's show rendered again to show that it's actually open, like you can see into there, right? Let's slide this to a new area. I accidentally held down Alt, which is why it multiplied. If you hold down Alt when you're dragging with the Gumball tool, it produces like multiple of that object. Just by the way, I accidentally did that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to draw a new box. I'm going to draw it right on top of this one. I'm going to drag this up, and what I'm going to do is actually cut this box by this surface, and then the remainder is what is going to be my surface that I'm going to print out. Does that make sense? Let's just see if it works. Let's type in slice or split, select cutting object. So I have my object I want to cut that's selected, and then I want to select my cutting object, which is this, hit enter. Done. And then let's just move this off. And then suddenly what's left is my closed shape underneath the surface I just manipulated. I like to use this method because then I can control the exact slice of land I'm taking out. Like imagine like you have a big landscape and you have all these like contours that you've worked with, right? To create that landscape, and you just want to take in a little square of it, you can drag in a box to the right scale and size onto your landscape, use your landscape to slice that box, and then suddenly you have this little like vignette of that landscape.
That's like great. Perfect. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. That's wonderful.
No problem. Anything else before we move on to the next one? Let's delete these. Anybody want to choose one?
Can we do the one that kind of looks like scaffolding?
This one, the cube?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure, we can do that. Okay, so this one I actually advise beginning in top view. And then we can draw one side of it and then use the gumball to start multiplying that side of it. So then we can create all 6 sides of that cube. Okay, so let's start with polyline. Right, so I typed in polyline. And I can use that to kind of draw this cube here, right? I'm going to hit spacebar because that brings up polyline again in my command line. And I'm just going to start drawing these lines. I'm not going to make it as complicated as the one you see. Oh, let's turn grid snap on. I'm going to make it a little simpler just for the sake of time. But, the more lines you add, the more complex you can make your thing. Okay, so once we have these lines, whoops, let me just add one more here. Enter. So now once we have these lines, there's this really simple command we can use called pipe. So let's just type that in. Let's select our lines and type in pipe. And we can specify the radius. I don't want it 1 centimeter. Maybe I want it 0.1 centimeter. And I hit enter. And as you can see, what that did is it drew circles or pipes around my lines. So I go into perspective and I go into rendered, and you can see I have these circle lines. I didn't draw my lines exactly straight, but you could and should, because it'll, it's distracting if you have lines that look wrong in your models. But for the sake of this tutorial, it's okay. And then next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type in group. So now all of these lines are treated as one object, right? So I'm going to hold down Alt now and use the rotate tool, these curves, to create multiple sides. And then I'm going to use the up and down arrows in the gumball to then start moving it into the right location. Okay, let's do that again. Let's hold down Alt. And then, whoops, let's hold down. So it created my second surface, and then I'm using the green arrow to move that into the right place, and now the red arrow to move into the right place. So as you can see now, I have this like 3 sides of the cube piped. And then I'm going to select all of them, and I'm going to, actually, I'm just going to select these 2, and I'm going to rotate it one more time by holding down Alt. I'm holding down Alt, and I'm going to try rotating it now. I was actually not holding down Alt. That's why I wasn't rotating and duplicating, but I did that last time. Okay. And then so now I have 5 sides, and then let's take my final surface and hold down Alt to duplicate it and just move this one over. Okay, now I have a cube with six sides that are finished with the pipe. And the more complicated you make this line work, the more and more you can make it look like this cube here. Okay, so that's that one. Any more questions around this? Or maybe we can find somebody to choose a different one of these vignettes here that we can do in our tutorial next. Anybody?
Matt, could you do the one with the trees?
Sure. The conifers or the...
Yeah, the one at the back.
Sure, yeah, I'll do that. Actually, I'll show you how to do both
Okay.
sets of trees, because it's actually the same commands in Rhino. Okay, so let's delete this cube. We don't need it anymore. Okay, and more recently, I've actually been creating my trees with pyramids. You could just as easily do it with cone, but let's try it with pyramid. Okay, so let's type in pyramid, hit enter, follow the instructions here in the command line, center of inscribed pyramid. Let's just put it right in the corner. And let's draw the trunk of the tree first. And the trunk of the tree only needs to be, let's say, 0.5 centimeters wide. Great. Corner of pyramid, 0.5 centimeters. And now we're doing the height of the pyramid, or the end of it. You could, if I'm going down to my front view, I could go drop it down, or I could drop it up. Let's drop it up. And let's make that, let's say, 4 centimeters. Hit enter. Okay, so I'm going to use that as my trunk. Now let's do another pyramid to start to be the bottom layer of that evergreen. Let's type in pyramid again. Let's choose the same point as the center point. let's make this one a little bit wider. Let's make it, sure, let's make it 4 centimeters wide, and let's make it 4 centimeters tall. And then as you can see, it just kind of drew right on top of my last pyramid. That's not how trees grow. It would be like a nightmare of physics if it grew like that. So let's bring it back down. Using the gumball, and then I'm going to use the gumball again to then reproduce that pyramid shape so that I can stack 3 of them on top of each other. Right? So I'm going to hold on Alt, bring that up, and hold on Alt again and bring up a 3rd layer. But again, this isn't necessarily how you want your trees to look always, although it doesn't look that bad. But each tier of the tree shrinks, right? As you go up the tree. So let's start shrinking them. Let's actually use these square tools in the gumball to shrink them. Okay. And then let's shrink the top one a little more too. Maybe we'll make the middle one a little bit bigger. It's kind of up to you. Let's turn grid snap off, so I have a little more freedom with the width of these things. And then I can use my gumball tool to bring it back down a little bit. And then my last cone, maybe I want to decrease the height of it a little bit. And I can use the gumball tool to do all of these things. Maybe I want to increase the height of that one a little bit. Anyway, you can use the gumball tool as I was just doing to play around with things. Last thing you can do is if you want to rotate one of these so it looks a little bit more realistic, right? You can do that too. Cool. And then now if you group this whole tree, you can actually start to, like, again, hold down Alt and start multiplying it with the gumball. Okay. So any questions with that one? Otherwise, I'll just start drawing the deciduous tree in winter. So for the deciduous tree, you can use, cone or pyramid again. I'm going to use cone this time. So once I selected cone, or you can type cone in, the first thing it has you do is specify the base of the cone. Okay, let's turn on grid snap again this time so it snaps to the corner. Let's make my base of the cone 0.75 centimeters this time. Hit enter. And let's make the height of the cone, let's make it a little bit taller just for fun. Let's make it 7 centimeters. Hit enter. Right, and actually let's stretch it out even more, just for the right proportions. Okay, so I have that cone. Next thing I want to do now that I have this cone is I want to start to do the branching structures outside of the main trunk. So I'm going to click on this cone. Again, I'm going to use my gumball. I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to make my cone a little bit smaller so it kind of looks like a secondary branch. Turn grid snap off. Right? You see what I'm doing? I'm using the gumball and I'm making a secondary branch, and then I'm going to rotate. I'm going to turn ortho off too, because what this was doing is constraining me as to the angle I could rotate at. So I turned ortho off, and now I can put my tree trunk kind of wherever I want to make it look like a secondary branch coming out of this tree. See that? And you can just keep doing it. So let's do it one more time. Let's hold down Alt. Let's move this over. Let's reduce the width of this trunk from multiple angles. Let's reduce the length. And let's rotate it. And use the gumball to put it in the right place. you go, right? So now if we group this, now we have one object that you can start to reproduce again with the gumball by holding down Alt. Okay, so that's that. While we're here, I just did one thing. I don't know if you guys caught this, but I selected using the top down. So if this is just like AutoCAD, I just want to talk about selection for a sec. If I go from top left to bottom right, I only select images or objects that are entirely contained in my selection. But if I select from bottom left to top right, I select objects that I touch in the selection. Does that make sense? Just like AutoCAD and a lot of other modeling tools use that same technique. So just be wary about that. But anyway, you have your trees now. And if you do something like this, also just be aware that, you know, because these points are very fine, it's less likely that you'll be able to print, 3D print stuff like this. I'm not sure what the fineness that this printer can print at, but just be aware that, you know, if you include trees like this, it's not likely they'll be able to be printed. So if you want your thing printed, you should probably do a landform that has kind of wider bases or shapes.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's yeah, with this printer is not it's not as detailed as more like higher end printers. It still will print, but it's better to do more wider base landforms.
Mm-hmm. But you know, as you use Rhino for other projects,
yeah, for other projects, yeah, of course. Great.
Okay, so I'd like to show you guys two more things anyway. Like maybe I can show you how to do this one.
Yeah, do one with the stepped contours. That's an important one, just to show how to create like surfaces, curves, and then extruding those curves into a step format.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so let's delete these. Okay, so first thing, let's start with a box or a rectangle, grid snap on. Because again, like I know I want to print this out, so I'm going to constrain my drawing to whatever's in this rectangle. Okay, next I can start to use curves to start drawing my river valley. Let's draw. Okay, so let's just start using curves to draw this river valley. Enter. And just like AutoCAD, you know, I'm sure it's one of your favorite tools or commands, offset, right? So just like AutoCAD, you can offset things in Rhino. And let's just do that a whole bunch here. But also, you know, offsetting things, the natural world doesn't really offset things unless you're building like roads and sidewalks. If you're doing like a meandering river valley, it probably doesn't start to look like this. So you can start customizing your offsets with, you know, using these points if you wanted to. I just wanted to show you that offset was a tool here to use. Or you can just start kind of freehand drawing a curve next to this one that kind of looks like it could be natural. Let's turn on grid snap off. And we'll do that here for at least a couple of lines. Let's draw a couple more. I'm going to hit spacebar again because it'll bring up curves that I can draw, because that was my last command I was using. Whoops. Enter. Okay, and then now let's offset by, let's say, 0.75 offset. Spacebar offset. Okay, now like AutoCAD, this is just like AutoCAD line work. I want to extend this line to the edge of my rectangle. I'm just going to type in extend, select curve to extend, that one, and that one's already extended all the way, enter. Okay, now let's trim because I don't want these lines going out of my rectangle. I'm going to type in trim, whoops, trim. And because I have my trimming line already selected, I can now just select the lines I want to trim. So again, just like AutoCAD, right? I don't know if this is triggering for any of you that really dislike using AutoCAD. I find some of the tools that are similar between the two a little triggering because I do not like to use AutoCAD. I love using Rhino. Okay, now what we have are these lines, right? Now let's actually do something called, let's put a planar surface within this rectangle. So I type in planar surface. So what that's done is it has created a surface in this rectangle that I had selected. And then now what I want to do is I want to split that surface by all these lines that I've drawn, right? So surface, split, select cutting objects. I'm just going to select all these lines now. Hit enter. Okay, now what that has done is it's created all of these surfaces, right? Within the lines, as you can see. And now Rhino's detecting multiple surfaces here. Okay, so now let's start to extrude these surfaces so that we can create this like tiered landscape, right? So let's extrude this one by 2 centimeters. Okay, it's interesting. See what that has done? It didn't extrude that surface because I just used the Gumball tool. So let's actually get back to that and I'll show you how to work around that. But first, let's actually extrude the surface. Let's type in extrude, extrude surface. Is it here somewhere? Here we go. Enter. Whoops, type in extrude mesh. Let's type in extrude surface. Extrude surface, select surfaces to extrude that one, hit enter. And I can specify now where I want the surface to go. Let's do 2 centimeters. That's where it's at. And if you see here, my surface is open. So let's just type in cap on that open surface and that closes that surface off. Okay, let's do another one. Extrude surface. Here we go, hit enter. And let's do this by 1.5 centimeters. Again, let's type in cap for that. Once I have the surface selected, I can type in cap, that closes that off. Okay, there's another tool you can use too called Extrude Curve. Right, so instead of extruding the surface that I had selected, I can extrude the curve, which is here. I hit enter, and I can bring the curve up to, let's say, 1 centimeter. But the problem with doing that is it only extrudes that one curve, whereas extruding the surface would have brought all 4 lines around, like all 4 curves around that surface up along with it. So just know the difference between extrude surface and extrude curve. Extrude surface. Let's do this at 0.5. And then cap again. Once I have that selected. Okay, so you can do the same thing for the other side now, and then you can see how you've then created this kind of more tiered or terraced landscape. And again, if we look back at this image that Nadia showed us in the class, that's pretty much how you can start creating these types of shapes. It's just a more refined interval between the curves that were used to create this. Okay. Was that helpful?
Yeah, Matt, that's great. That's great. Maybe that because you're on this,
Yeah.
can you show them the drape if they want to have like that, those stairs a little bit softer of some sort?
Yeah, sure. Let's type in drape now. And then when you type in drape, the next thing it asks you for is drag a window over the area to drape. So I can just click and drag. And then there you go. Like that has essentially like laid a cloth on top of my 3D model here. So again, it looks a lot like a cloth, right? Let's go back and change the parameters of drape a little bit because I want to change the undulation of the cloth. So I type in drape, hit enter. Let's change spacing to 1. Let's see what happens. And then I'm going to drag over this area again. See how the undulation has changed to make it a lot softer and smaller. Now let's try drape again. Whoops. And let's change the spacing to 20 and drag over the model for drape. And again, that changes it too. So that kind of looks a little bit like snow on steps if you're trying to achieve that look also.
Great, that's perfect. Thanks so much.
No problem. Should I just go into like buildings really quickly, like how to start drawing buildings?
Yeah, you could just show how to put a simple form on a topographical form. And one last thing, maybe you could show the projection maybe of a path. It doesn't necessarily need to be for this project, but it could be for another one.
Okay, maybe I'll show that next week.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah.
And then today I'll just show this kind of house sitting on a mound, maybe.
Yeah, perfect. Okay.
Okay, so first let's actually draw the house. So let's draw the box first. Let's draw a box that kind of looks like this. So what I'm trying to do is now draw like a 2-story family home, right? Let's try and do an A-frame roof. So I'm going to use a polyline tool. And like AutoCAD, when you're mid command, you can type in these little like hints, like center or mid or point. I typed in mid, which will help me find the midpoint of this house so that I can draw. I'm going to use a front tool to draw straight up because I want to do the center of the A-frame roof. Let's make that 2 centimeters tall. And then I'm just going to kind of draw a triangle around to form that roof. And then I'm going to type in point now so that my Rhino line finds that point I just created, hit enter. So now I have this triangle shape. I'm going to type in trim. I'm going to try and trim out my, whoops, let's not do trim actually. Let's type in explode. What I'm trying to do now is, see what happened here? See how I was only drawing a line in perspective and it kind of brought my line all the way back. Let's just use point to bring this line to this corner here, okay? And then there's a second line in here that I was drawing in the back. I'm just gonna edit that point and bring it here. So now that, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a surface within these lines that I'm gonna then extrude to cover this entire building as an A-frame roof. But first I'm gonna delete that middle point. I'm going to highlight all 3 of these curves and I'm gonna type in join. So they're constituted as to one shape, and then I'm going to type in planar surface. That'll put a surface in between all three of those lines. And then I'm going to type in extrude surface. So now I can extrude the surface over this entire shape. And as you can see, I just select the shape. I want to cap this end now to make it a closed shape. I type in cap. And then I have that closed shape there. I'm going to get rid of that curve now because I don't need it. And I'm going to show you one more thing to do with this house so you can start to give it a little bit more like life, I guess. So let's like carve out a door into this house, and you can use the same tool to then carve out windows. But I'm going to use the tool Boolean difference. I'm going to create the shape of a door, and I'm going to subtract that shape of the door from the house. So I'm going to click on box. I'm going to draw a box that's 1 meter wide, and that's about 2.5 meters high, right? So there's my box. I'm going to slide it into where I want to subtract it from out of the house. I'm going to turn grid snap off so I have more flexibility moving this object within the grid lines. All right, and now I'm going to type in Boolean difference. Select surface or poly surface to subtract from. I want to subtract from the house. And now select surface to subtract with. I want to subtract using the door. Hit enter. Now I have a door in this little house. See how easy that was? Like,
Nice. Thank you. That's perfect.
yeah.
And that
so
can happen with anything, even if you want to do a tunnel right through the house.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. For example, yeah, let's just take, let's just make a tunnel, right? Let's make a cylinder, right? Let's use the gumball to reorient that cylinder, and let's position it where we want the tunnel to be. Roughly there, right? Okay, let's type in Boolean. Whoops. Sorry. Just type in Boolean difference. Select surfaces to subtract from. Select surface to subtract with. Enter. Oh, I misdid it. Okay, so I'm going to do it again. Boolean difference. Select surface to subtract with, because I already have the surface to subtract from. Enter. I think I was just clicking the wrong thing. Let's try one more time. Extrusion, Boolean, difference, select surface to subtract with. I'm just going to zoom in, hit enter. Okay, I'm not sure why that's not working. I'll have to figure that out. Let's try one more time thing. I'm going to try exploding. I think there's just a curve surface on top. Yeah, so there's just a surface on top of the hole. Anyway, there's just things like that. Like that's why this choose object tool is important, right? Because if you have objects layered on top of each other, it can get a little confusing. So this helps you see how many objects you actually have under that surface or point you're trying to click on. Okay?
That's great. Thank you.
No problem. So that's that. I think, you know, we've covered a lot of this. I think you guys can make all of these now, even though we didn't cover all of the specifics. But yeah, yeah, good luck. And I guess I'll be back next week. I encourage you guys to all get Rhino and start experimenting with it before next week's class, if possible. Just so, if you have specific questions, we can even get to them then.